Today we'll be doing a lesson on adding, subtracting, and multiplying complex numbers. And so we're going to do one example of each. The first example we'll do is adding complex numbers. And the key fact or star to remember is that we're going to combine the real with the real and the imaginary with the imaginary. Real with the real, imaginary with the imaginary. And so we have an example number 1, 3 minus 6i plus 7 plus 10i. Both of those are complex numbers. And so we're going to look at the real part. We're going to look at the real part of each, 3 and 7, and combine those to be 10. And then we'll look at the imaginary part of each, negative 6i and positive 10i, and combine those to be just plus 4i. And so that's as easy as it gets with complex numbers. Adding complex numbers, no need to change signs or anything else. We just put the real parts together and put the imaginary parts together. The only time that will be tricky is if the real parts and imaginary parts are mixed up, or that's about it. So the next type of example that we'll do is subtracting complex numbers. And so let's look at one example of subtracting complex numbers. And the key fact to remember when we're subtracting complex numbers is that we're going to distribute the subtraction sign. And so what I want you to notice right away is this big subtraction sign in the middle. And what we're going to do is distribute that subtraction sign. I'm going to actually change it to a positive sign, and that will make me have to change both signs in the polynomial that's behind it, the binomial. So this will change to a positive, and this one will change to a negative. And so now it becomes an addition problem, and the only thing I'm going to do is combine the real with the real. And so that's just 8 plus 3, which is 11. And the imaginary with the imaginary, which is positive 7 plus negative 6i, which will be just positive 1i. And I don't have to put the 1 in front, so my answer here will just be 11 plus I. And so only thing you really need to know there is to distribute the negative sign. That's key for subtraction. And then the last type of example that we're going to do is multiplying complex numbers. And the key here, there's a couple keys here, and this is a little bit harder, is that we are going to use FOIL. Remember, FOIL stands for first, outside, inside, last, and that I squared is equal to negative 1. I squared is equal to negative 1. And so the very first thing I want you to notice is the relationship between the two. I have a binomial, 3 plus 7i and 2 minus 4i. The relationship between them is multiplication. And so make sure that you understand that. It's multiplication, and it's really just, at the end of the day, it's just two binomials. One binomial times another binomial. Okay? So the very first thing that I want to do is do 3 times 2 and get 6. And then 3 times negative 4i and get negative 12i. And then 7i times 2, which is plus 14i. And then 7i times negative 4i, which was negative 28i squared. Okay? A couple things happen here. First, the middle two terms will combine. They're like terms. Okay, so my next step, I can say 6 plus 2i. Those middle two terms will combine to be 2i. And then in my last term, something special happens. I squared in mathematics is equal to negative 1 because of what it says up there. So in that place, I can substitute a negative 1. I say negative 1. Negative 28 times negative 1 is positive 28. So my next step will be 6 plus 2i plus 28 to change that to a positive 28. Then I can simplify the last two terms and get 34 plus 2i for my final answer. 34 plus 2i for my final answer. So that will always happen. You will always end up with a complex number at the end of multiplying two complex numbers, two binomial complex numbers. I'll end up with a complex number. The I squared will go away and become -1 on every multiplying complex numbers. So that's your lesson for today. Make sure you take some time and finish writing down each example.